Masters of deceit, the government's propaganda of fear, mind control, and influencing people's brains. A couple of days ago, I uploaded a video concerning a woman having to do with her telekinesis and telepathic abilities. But this is something that governments all over the world are trying to use as an asset. This is authored by John and Nisha Whitehead via the Rutherford Institute on Zero Hedge. It is the function of mass agitation to exploit all the grievances, hopes, aspirations, prejudices, fears, and ideals of all the special groups that make up our society, social, religious, economic, racial, political, stir them up, set one against the other, divide and conquer. That's the way to soften up a democracy. This is what J. Edgar Hoover, Masters of Deceit, claims. And this is also being done by the US government. It's Russia, Chinese, but this government, it's having to do with overreaching its authority and abusing power, treats citizens like faceless statistics. We even had a video yesterday posted by information from WEF and Klaus Schwab desiring to put chips in people's brains in order to read their minds. And he was talking to a Google executive who was really alarmed by what Klaus Schwab had announced. This is back in 2017. And Schwab told him, well, it's going to happen. So you can understand what the WF desires. So governments are becoming indistinguishable from what we believe is evil, and whether that evil takes the form of theft, scientific experimentation, some other diabolical means of inflicting pain, suffering, and servitude on humanity. With every passing day, it becomes painfully clear that we can't trust certain services with our lives, and our loved ones, our livelihoods, or our freedoms. Now, just recently, for example, the Pentagon was compelled to order a sweeping review of clandestine U.S. psychological warfare operations, PSYOPs, conducted through social media platforms. The investigation comes in the response to reports suggesting that the U.S. military has been creating bogus persona with AI-generated profile pictures and fictitious media sites on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram in order to manipulate social media users. Now we know that China is doing this too, and Russia. Now, psychological warfare, as the U.S. Army's 4th Psychological Operation Group explained in a recruitment video released earlier this year, enables the government to pull the strings, turn everything they touch, and use it, be everywhere, deceive, persuade, change, influence, and inspire. And of the many assets the government's vast arsenal has, psychological warfare, or PSYOPs, can take many forms: mind control experiments, behavioral nudging, and propaganda. In the 1950s, MKUltra, the mind control program developed under CIA Director Allen Dulles as part of his brain warfare Cold War campaigns, subjected hundreds of unsuspecting American civilians and military personnel to doses of LSD, some having hallucinogenic drugs slipped into their drinks at the beach, in city bars, at restaurants. For Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA hired women to lure men into a bugged room where they would be dosed with LSD, observing their actions. As Brianna Nuffel explains, UK MKUltra's mind control experiments generally centered around behavior modification via electroshock therapy, hypnosis, polygraphs, radiation, and a variety of drugs, toxins, and chemicals. The CIA spent nearly $20 million in its MKUltra program, reportedly as a means of programming people to carry out deeds that they didn't know were that evil, to a lesser degree including anxieties and erasing memories before it was supposedly shut down. As one study reported, detainees held in CIA safe houses abroad were literally interrogated in experimental methods combining drugs, hypnosis, and torture to attempt to master brainwashing techniques and memory erasing. Similarly, the top secret Montauk project, the inspiration for the hit Netflix series Stranger Things, allegedly was working to develop mind control techniques that would then be tested out on locals in a nearby village, triggering crime waves or causing teenagers to congregate. As journalist Lorraine Boineau concludes, despite MKUltra violating ethical norms for human experiments, the legacy of brainwashing experiments continue to live in the U.S. in U.S. policy. The same methods that had once been used to train American soldiers ending up being used to extract information from terrorists in Abu Ghraib, Iraq, and Guantanamo Bay. Fast forward to the present day, it's clear that the government, aided and abetted by technological advances and scientific experimentation, has updated its psyops warfare for a new era. For instance, the government has been empowered to use its ever-expanding arsenal and technologies to influence behaviors en masse and control the populace. It's a short hop, skip, and a jump from a behavioral program that tries to influence how people respond to paperwork to a government program that tries to shape the public's views about other more consequential matters. Thus, increasingly, governments around the world, including the United States, are relying on, quote, nudge units, end quote, to steer citizens in the direction that powers that be want them to go, while preserving the appearance of free will. Now, back in 2014, for example, a fusion center in Washington State, Department of Homeland Security linked data collection clearinghouse that shares information between state, local, and federal agencies, inadvertently released reports on remote mind control tactics, the use of psychoelectronic weapons to control people from a distance or subject them to varying degrees of pain. Indeed, the pandemic could easily be considered such a thing disguised as a pandemic. Science writer David Robson explained, fears of contagion lead us to become more conformist and tribalistic. Daily reminders of this may even sway our political affiliations. Various experiments have shown that we become more conformist and respectful of convention when we feel the threat of a disease. The evocative images of a pandemic led to the experiment to value conformity and obedience over eccentricity or rebellion. And this is how you persuade a populace: by voluntarily march in lockstep with a police state, police themselves, by ratcheting up the fear factor. Meted out one carefully calibrated crisis at a time, teaching them to distrust any who diverge from the norm. And this is not a new experiment in mind control. As the government's inclination to monitor online activity and police so-called disinformation, you have the markings of the restructuring of reality, straight out of Orwell's 1984, where the Ministry of Truth polices speech and ensures that facts conform to whatever version of reality the government propagandists embrace. So this policing of the mind, quote unquote, is exactly the danger author Jim Keith warned about when he predicted that information communication sources are gradually being linked together into a single computerized network, providing an opportunity for unheralded control of what will be broadcast, what will be said, and ultimately what will be thought. We've already seen this play out on the state and federal level with hate crime legislation that cracks down on so-called hateful thoughts and expressions, encouraging self-censoring and reducing free debate on various subject matter. The end goal of these mind control campaigns, packaged in the guise of greater good, is to see how far the people will allow the government to go in reshaping the country in an image of a totalitarian state. The government's fear-mongering, yet another key element in its mind control propaganda. It's a simple enough formula: national crisis, global pandemics, reported attacks, sporadic events that are harmful to society. The emotional panic that accompanies fear actually shuts down the prefrontal cortex, or the rational thinking part of our brains, In other words, when we are consumed by fear, we stop thinking. A populace that stops thinking for themselves is a populace that's easily led, easily manipulated, easily controlled, whether through propaganda, brainwashing, mind control, or just plain fear-mongering. Fear not only increases the power of government, it also divides the people into factions, persuades them to see each other as the enemy, and keeps them screaming at each other so that they drown out all other sounds. In this way, they will never reach consensus about anything and will be too distracted to notice the police state closing in on them until the final crushing curtain falls. This Machiavellian scheme has so ensnared the nation that few Americans even realize they are being brainwashed, manipulated into adopting an us against them mindset. All the while, those in power, bought and paid for by lobbyists and corporations, move their costly agendas forward. This unseen mechanism of society that manipulates us through fear into compliance is what American theorist Edward Bernays referred to as an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. It was almost 100 years ago when Bernays wrote his seminal work, Propaganda. Quote, "We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of, in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking. We are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind." End quote. Now, at this point, I point out in my book, Battlefield America, The War on American People, and it's in its fictional counterpart, the Eric Blair Diaries, to this invisible government of rulers who operate behind the scenes, the architects of the deep state, that we are mere puppets on a string to be brainwashed, manipulated, controlled. For years now, the powers that be, those politicians and bureaucrats who think like tyrants and act like petty dictators regardless of what party they belong to, attempted to brainwash us into believing that we have no rights to think for ourselves, make decisions about our health, protect our home and families and businesses, act in our best interests, demand accountability and transparency from government, or generally operate as if we are in control of our lives. Well, the government is wrong. We have every right, and you know why? Because as the Declaration of Independence states, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness that no government can take away from us. So it's time we started reminding the government that we, the people, the first three words, the beautiful first three words of the U.S. Constitution, are the ones in charge. So this is by John and Nisha Whitehead, the Rutherford Institute on Zero Hedge. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.